Welcome to The Conversation. I'm Dasha Burns, White House Bureau Chief for Politico. And every week on this show, I bring one of the most compelling voices in Washington and beyond in for a chat to find out how they're navigating this incredible era of American politics. And today, I'm joined by California Congressman Khanna. I wanted to talk to him this week because he's been coming up all over my feed. He's been outspoken on the Israel-Iran conflict. He has these progressive economic policies he's been very vocal about, but he's been critical of how Senator Schumer has been responding on Iran and Israel. He's also been critical of how Democrats have approached the economy, and he's made some surprising friends across the aisle, including Steve Bannon, who's been out there praising him. Plus, his district encompasses Silicon Valley, so you better bet I wanted to talk to him about Elon Musk and all those tech bros. Here's my conversation with Congressman Khanna. Congressman Khanna, welcome to The Conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Dasha. I'm excited to do it.
Let's just dive right in because you've been pretty outspoken. I've been seeing your posts on X coming up across my feed. You've been kind of in a bit of a tango with Senator Chuck Schumer over his response to where Congress should play a role in stopping Trump from getting the U.S. involved in Israel's conflict with Iran. Are you disappointed with Senator Schumer and Democratic leadership on this issue right now?
Yes, with Senator Schumer. I didn't understand his response. Did you? The question was, are you going to bring Senator Kane's resolution to stop the war in Iran to Congress and to require Congress to vote on it? He could have said, no, I'm not, because I want Trump to attack Iran. Or he could have said, yes, I am, which is where I think the Democratic Party should be. Instead, he gave this gobbledygook answer, which no one other than Washington Beltway consultants understand. Part of my problem is he didn't take a clear stand. That's exactly what people hate about the Democratic Party. Secondly, he has been cheerleading for these strikes in Iran. He was telling Trump he wasn't tough enough when Trump was being considering negotiation in Obama's, following Obama's footsteps. Chuck Schumer opposed Barack Obama at every step of the way when he was going to get the JCPOA. And Chuck Schumer is someone who's cheerled us into the war in Iraq. I said, that those are the last folks who have moral credibility in this country. And someone said, well, the fact that they cheerled us in the war in Iraq shows just how long they've been in elective office. My question is not just that, but it's his judgment. So I'm deeply disappointed.
What do you think of the Democratic leadership in this moment? This is such a critical juncture for our foreign policy, lives literally at stake here. What should the Democratic Party be doing right now?
We should be the party of peace. We should be the party against getting us into another colossal blunder in Iran. We should learn the lessons that Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, John Edwards never became president of the United States because they were complicit in supporting the war in Iraq. Guess who did become president? Barack Obama, because he was opposed to the war in Iraq.
And Donald Trump, who said he wasn't going to get us into any more foreign wars.
And Donald Trump, I still remember the debate. I remember the debate in 2016, and all Jeb Bush had to do is say my brother was wrong. But he took 5 days. He gave an answer like Chuck Schumer's answer. I don't know, right, wrong, that no one understood in the country. And Donald Trump got there and said that was the dumbest war that hurt America. And that's why he became president.
There's this kind of almost horseshoe thing happening with Democrats and Republicans on the more progressive and on the more hyper-conservative wings of the party kind of being on the same page about the Iran issue. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, let's stay out of it. You've paired up with GOP Representative Massey to put legislation on the table to try to stop Trump from getting us involved in Iran. Do you think this is a moment where Democrats using this could potentially bring over some anti-war Republicans into the fold? Obviously, you're not going to get an MTG to suddenly flip and become a Democrat, but there are some folks who voted for Bernie Sanders, then voted for Donald Trump that might be gettable here.
I completely agree with you, Dasha. Instead of doing $20 million studies to understand how to win young men with no substance and hiring more consultants, what we ought to learn is that we should have substantive positions that speak to people. One of the things young men don't want is another war overseas.
They don't want you to just call yourself Khanna and start chugging creatine on podcasts?
I mean,
I thought that was the way
no,
forward.
a relatively skinny Indian American is not gonna cut out as a creatine drinking, guy who's gonna bench press, 2 plates. American people are very smart, and young people are smart, and they care about the substance. One of the things we can do is to take on the foreign policy establishment in this country that got us into an Iraq war, that kept us in Afghanistan for 20 years, then miscalculated with Gaddafi's overthrow. And by the way, now they're saying, okay, let's just take out Fordo in the deep underground nuclear site in Iran. We see this story time and again. There's a temptation to think that a military action is going to be successful in the moment. It's celebrated, and then we reap the consequences for years and decades to come. I don't want the country making the same mistake. I believe that in this sense, the anti-establishment candidacies of both the right and the left have been against a foreign policy establishment that has failed this country, and against economic policies with NAFTA, with China and the World Trade Organization that also failed a large part of the country.
Well, what do you think is going on with this administration's foreign policy? Because I know you did support in Trump's first administration his idea to pull folks out of the Middle East to get people out of Afghanistan. He did campaign saying, "Look, there were no wars under my first administration. I'm going to keep us out of these foreign entanglements." And you have a ton of his base that does not want him to get deeply involved here. But that seems to be where we're heading. What do you think is going on, and what's your message to this White House?
My message is that Donald Trump is betraying some of the central promises that got him elected. His instincts when he ran were to keep us out of these kind of wars. And I don't understand who's in his ear right now that he is thinking of just having these strikes in Iran and thinking that we aren't going to get entangled. I mean, if he goes and strikes Iran, first of all, Iran could redevelop that nuclear capacity. And by the way, the lesson we'd be sending them is go become like Pakistan or North Korea, because you're not safe unless you have a nuclear weapon. They're going to get out of the NPT if we do this, and they're going to kick out any of the remaining inspectors. Secondly, they may retaliate against American targets in Iraq and in the Middle East. Third, they may hit the Strait of Hormuz. This is the argument I'd make to President Trump. Do you really want oil prices spiking on your watch? I mean, the reality is that most of this country does not want a war in Iran, and the American people are sick of it. And they want new leadership on both the right and the left. And I just think that the old guard is way out of touch with where the country is.
Iran and Israel, this conflict is, you're seeing, splitting up the Republican Party in a lot of ways. Israel Hamas, that conflict has been really sticky for Democrats, and the Democratic base is all over the place on that issue. How do you see Democrats being able to, are they able to bridge the divide on Israel?
We can be the party of peace in that region that talks about what some call a 23-state solution. That means we should recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish democratic state. That means we should recognize that Hamas's terrorist attack on October 7th was repulsive, completely unjustified, and there had to be a response to get the terrorists. But that response didn't have to go on 2 years. It didn't have to kill 55,000 Palestinians. Now, some of those terrorists, but many women and children. It didn't have to injure 130,000 Palestinians. It didn't have to have 600,000 plus Palestinian kids without school for 2 years, 400,000 plus Palestinians facing starvation. We now need to say that enough, stop the war. And by the way, we can remove Hamas from Gaza, not through military action, but getting these 23 states, getting the Saudis, getting Jordan, getting Egypt, getting the Arab League, Palestinian Voices, Israel, and the United States to have a new administration in Palestine that will recognize Israel's right to exist. And America should play that leadership. And I frankly was hoping maybe Donald Trump would go in that direction. Still, he could win the Nobel Prize if he were to do that.
I think that's still something he's hoping for by the end of this administration. We'll see where that goes.
Well, the blueprint is for him to tell Netanyahu, stop it. Everyone knows why Netanyahu is continuing this. It's because of Ben Gvir and Smotrich in his cabinet, who has basically said, if you don't stop the bombing, if you stop the bombing, we're going to leave your cabinet, and Netanyahu would lose his prime ministership. Trump needs to say, stop the bombing, and then he should get with the Saudis, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, the Palestinians, and Israel, and come up with a new form of government in Palestine, and make that new form of government recognize they have to recognize the existence of Israel as a Jewish democratic state. That would be good not just for the Palestinian people's self-determination, it would be good for Israel.
I do want to dig a little deeper on the state of the Democratic Party and this question of age, right? AOC has recently called it a gerontocracy, just saying Democratic leadership is too old. You had, the fight within the DNC with David Hogg wanting to primary Democrats in blue areas to get younger leadership in. Like, in this moment, is this a matter of leadership that's been around for too long in the Democratic Party that you think needs to go? Or how do you solve for this?
I do think there need to be new voices that people have held on too long. Some people 50, 60 years in elective office. Now, I think there needs to be a balance in age. If we had a Congress filled with 30 and 40-year-olds, I'd say that's a real problem. And it's a real problem when you
But
have
we're so far from that right now.
We are. And that's why I don't think it's ageist to say you want a Congress that has the diversity of ages of the country. And what you've seen is office holders hold on. They're incumbents. They have name ID. They have tons of money. And it's very hard for young people to break into politics. When Bill Clinton ran for Congress back in 1972 or 1974, whenever he ran, it took $40,000 to run for Congress. Now it costs millions of dollars. And if you are a young person in your 20s or 30s, how are you going to get those millions of dollars to run? The reality is there's frustration because a group of people have hoarded these positions for too long. And that's why I supported David Hogg's view that there should be primary challenges in this country, in the Congress. By the way, it'd be very hypocritical for people like me who won on a primary challenge. I
was going to say, it took you you failed twice, and then finally your third time you won out.
I failed 3 times. I mean, 2
3
times. And one on
Two
the third
times, yeah.
time. Right. One for 3. It's a hard thing to do. And I had, Nancy Pelosi, who I have great respect for, and in some ways was a mentor, but she endorsed against me 3 times, as did the entire establishment. It's a hard thing. And that's, I think, what rubs people the wrong way, because I thought I was a good Democrat. Now, the person I ran against, Mike Khanna, maybe he was a good Democrat. But why did the whole establishment go for him just because he was the incumbent? That's wrong. We have to understand we're not making room for a fair competition of new people coming in. You shouldn't just endorse people because they happen to be your friends and they've served in power with you.
Do you think that the DNC kind of screwed up by not embracing David Hogg and his ideas a bit more?
I think the DNC should have found a way to keep him in the tent. I proposed to David Hogg that he should be allowed to do the primary challenges with an organization. He should just, in his personal capacity, not endorse if he was an officer of the DNC. And I think he may have been open to that. But I want to be a big tent party, and I think it was a mistake to lose Randy Weingarten. It was a mistake to lose David Hogg.
I've been talking to Democrats for months since the election, trying to find out, what do you guys think happened, right? How did you lose people that were a fundamental part of the tent, young voters, voters of color, working class voters? Many of them shifted to the right, and everyone seems to be saying that they're doing an autopsy, but there still doesn't seem to be a party-wide consensus on what went wrong and what needs to change. What's your diagnosis?
Well, one, we became the party of war. I think the Gaza situation really hurt us with a lot of young people, certainly in Wisconsin and Michigan. We would have won those 2 states but for that. Second, inflation. We were too late in recognizing how much people were hurting. We kept calling it transitory. We didn't have the urgency of a plan of what we were going to do to tackle inflation. Let me give you one example. Donald Trump erroneously is calling in the National Guard to Los Angeles to deal with the situation there. I oppose that. Did we ever call in the National Guard to say, you know what, we've got a supply chain shortage. We don't have people enough manning the ports. We're going to have an all-out mobilization and call the National Guard to deal with these supply chains shortages. Did we ever say, look, we've got to be producing more PPE in this country and more food and groceries, and we're going to have a direct action to be doing that and subsidizing that, even if we have to lower grocery prices while inflation is too high, or be more vigilant when we finally did react to the baby formula shortage, be faster in doing that. I think people just thought we weren't on top of it.
You brought up California. I think that in the conversations that I've been having, summer of 2020 still looms kind of large because that's where you had some of those um, movements that say defund the police, BLM, the real rise of DEI. That push became a lot more intense. All of those things that now a lot of Democrats, including yourself at times, have criticized as like a focus on too much of like these woke issues, right? And there was sort of a backlash to all of that. We're starting now to see some of the resistance galvanized, right, with the ICE protests in California, with the No Kings protests across the country. Should Democrats see this moment a little bit differently? Like, are there lessons learned from 2020 that are being applied now, or do you worry that the kind of galvanization and backlash could happen again?
I'm supportive and inspired by a lot of the mobilization. It's a mobilization for the Constitution, for saying people deserve constitutional rights. You can't just arrest people or handcuff people, including elected officials, without a due process. You can't deport people without some kind of due process. To me, that's Americans standing up for their constitutional rights. But I would say that what we should see and what we are seeing more of now in Los Angeles is people there respectful in their protests. Same with the civil rights movement. They caused good trouble, as John Lewis put it. And I think that we have to have that kind of discipline so that we have a moral higher ground. And a lot of the protests do have that.
Well, and you've seen though what the Trump administration and the right does when these protests aren't peaceful, aren't disciplined. The images coming out of LA online, especially on the right wing internet, are, the burning cars, people assaulting police officers. And that is why, when I talked to folks in the White House, they were like kind of gleeful about what was going on in California in terms of how Democrats were responding, because they feel like, oh, they can just connect Democratic politicians with those images, and that's politically helpful for Republicans.
I think the American voters are smart. I think what they want Democrats to say is that kind of vandalism is absolutely morally wrong. Burning of cars is wrong. I said that about Tesla. I got into trouble in my own party when I said people shouldn't be burning Teslas. This was when people really despised what Musk was doing. I said there are people in my district who work in these Tesla factories. You're hurting them.
Is it weird though that you got in trouble with your party for saying that? Like, what do you think
With some
that
people.
says?
Well, some
So,
people.
but that's yeah.
Well, you get in trouble in these days for almost anything you say. I'm sure I'm going to hear a ton of it from all the Schumer folks when this airs. But the point is, I'm kind of blunt spoken. I say what's on my mind, and the point is that we can condemn violence. We can condemn hurling insults at law enforcement. Most people are in law enforcement, including people whose job it is to protect the border or to enforce immigration. Most of them are good people who are doing public service. We can say all of that and have zero tolerance for violence against them, for harassment against them. And then we can also still say that you have due process in this country, that you can't just take someone away from their family and deport them without a process. And we can also say that most immigrants who are in the farms, who are in the hotels, who are working in hospitality are good, doing hard work, and they're supporting a family. And I don't believe that the vast majority of Americans want hardworking folks, even if they're undocumented or paying taxes, deported. Nor do I think Donald Trump is going to achieve that. What the American people want is a solution. And so the solution is that if you're a hardworking person who is undocumented, who's paying taxes. There should be a path towards legalization, and there should be a path ultimately towards citizenship. Trump opened that door for farm workers, for hospitality workers, and for workers in certain industries. There's a Farm Modernization Act in the House, which was bipartisan. I hope we could get something done there.
Bro, respectfully, you said so much there. There were a lot of different messages. We can say this, we can also say that, we can also say that, we can say all of these things at the same time. I think that, sometimes that's a lot harder than like one single message. I mean, I think something that, people across the board have said Trump does well is these very simple messages. And even on immigration, as he's opened this door now to change things on farms and in the hospitality industry, it's got people confused and rattled and kind of angry. Like, is there room in our current political discourse for like these five different messages for us to hold at the same time? Like, might that be part of the problem for Democrats? Like, you're trying to say too much at the same time?
Our greatest leaders were complex thinkers. I mean, Abraham Lincoln didn't have single sound bites. He had
Yeah, well,
thoughtful speeches.
there wasn't X and Instagram and TikTok
And
then,
neither
right?
and by the way, after George W. Bush, who did have kind of simple statements and got us into the war in Iraq, we had Barack Obama, one of the most profound, complex thinkers of modern times. Now, he also had an oratory that no one has in the modern Democratic Party. That's just a statement of fact. He was sort of sui generis. But the point is that we have had thinkers in our party, Bill Clinton, who I've had disagreements with, but who were real thinkers, and Barack Obama of complexity. And I actually think that at the end of Trumpism, this country is going to be exhausted by the bombast, exhausted by the sloganeering, exhausted by the simplicity of slogans, and want real solutions and complex thinking and people who recognize nuance and who have a real vision. And that's what the Democratic Party should do. We shouldn't mimic Donald Trump in his style.
You don't think there are any lessons to take away from the movement he's been able to build?
I do. I think the lessons that are that we hollowed out too much of the factory towns in this country, and that we need a real vision of how we bring industry and the economic security to places like Johnstown and Youngstown and Lorain, Ohio. I think the lesson is that we should be standing up to the foreign policy establishment that's gotten us into these overseas wars. I think the lesson is that we shouldn't be relying on high-paid consultants and should be speaking our mind. If Donald Trump can talk about conquering Greenland, certainly we can talk about Medicare for all without worrying about whether consultants think that's going to lose some swing voter. That's not how Donald Trump operates. He talks about what he believes. Some of it terrible, but we need to find the courage to stand up for our convictions. But what we don't need to do is say, okay, we're just going to offer our own sloganeering. I think we need to offer a substantive vision for the country and to elevate the American debate, to say that we're going to have something deeper and better after Americans are exhausted and embarrassed by what's going on.
You yourself are a child of immigrants. You've been outspoken on the issue of immigration, but boy, has immigration been sort of a losing issue for Democrats recently. How does the party need to talk about it differently? Like, what do you think needs to change to get Democrats on better footing on immigration?
Well, first, just factually, it was a winning issue for Joe Biden in 2020 because the country reacted with horror to Trump's family separations and the blanket way he banned Muslims from coming into the country. Then Trump had a huge advantage in 2024 in the polling because Americans thought that the border was not as secure as it needed to be, and too many people came in without the legal process. But now Trump's advantage is already eroding because people did not think that he was going to be going after hardworking immigrants, even if they were undocumented, who were paying taxes. They thought he would be going after violent gang members, and they didn't think he'd be shredding the Constitution. I think what the Democrats need to do is say, look, we believe in border security. We believe that people should come here through the regular process, but we understand immigrant families, and most immigrant families, like mine, emphasize hard work. They believe that I won the lottery by being born in America. They wanted me to study English as much as I could and study history and exude a love of country. They came to America by choice. It's a deep patriotism. They talked a lot more about my responsibilities than my rights. I think we have to talk about immigration in that way. And we also offer our plan for what we believe should happen to path to legalization, citizenship for those who are who are undocumented. It was basically the bipartisan compromise immigration bill around 2013, 2014 that Trump rejected. But that plan, I still think, is where the basic structure of it is where the American people ultimately will end up.
It's interesting because this issue is one that a lot of folks on the right would vehemently disagree with you on. Some would agree, but one in particular, Steve Bannon, has a completely different view of this. However, Steve Bannon, of all people, is a fan of Congressman Khanna. What do you make of his fondness for you? Like, what do you think he sees that makes him kind of like you in a way that might surprise a lot of people?
I keep thinking I'm going to say something on one of these interviews or podcasts where he's going to say, that kind of guy, totally disagree with him. But he diagnosed one thing absolutely correctly, and that was that we shafted a lot of people who built America. People in so many community towns, factory towns, where we had 90,000 factories close. You have $5 trillion companies in my district in 50 miles. Apple, Google, Nvidia, Tesla, and Broadcom, $14 trillion. You can't have a country that has that kind of prosperity in a few places and the rest of the places deindustrialized and dependent on federal resources. I said we need a Marshall Plan for America. We need to have, as our first, second, and third priority, the economic redevelopment of places like Lorain, Ohio, Farrell, Pennsylvania, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now, where I disagree with Donald Trump and Vance is I think we need a 21st century way of developing it. Modern factories, AI centers, healthcare, education. It can't just be tariffs and conquering Panama.
Are you a regular consumer of the Bannons and the Tucker Carlsons of the right? Like, do you watch? Do you look at what they're doing?
Sure. I mean, I look at them. I, of course, read the New York Times. I read the Wall Street Journal. I try to consume as many points of view. I guess I'm a little old-fashioned in the view that I don't think I have a monopoly on the truth. I don't think my party has a monopoly on the truth. I think the American people are pretty wise over the long run. And if people are voting time and again for Donald Trump, then maybe there's something we're missing. And we have to understand why they're doing that. There are two types of views in my party. One view is, well, just blame the voters and say they don't get it and they're too simplistic. I fundamentally reject that view. I think that what they're saying is, you messed up, and we did mess up. Carter messed up with the deregulation of the trucking industry that hurt all these pensions. We messed up with NAFTA that hurt a lot of these jobs, both Republicans and Democrats. We messed up letting China into the World Trade Organization. And I think we need to examine what we did wrong and then offer a new vision.
Are you the one to take Democrats to task then and point out where the party has screwed up?
I have. I started the show taking Schumer to task. We did not spend enough time caring about places in this country that built this nation, that built our steel, that built our autos. We told them, go move. We told them, it'll all be fine. Globalization will be fine. It turns out for 40 and 50 years, no one really cared about them. Their life didn't improve. They kept declining. And it was not just economic. It was a lack of respect. It was a lack of respect. All the glory was going to folks on Wall Street with finance and technology, and people felt that they weren't heard, that they weren't respected. And I think we've got to go there and say, not only do we respect you, here's our vision for bringing these communities back. When I give this message, people who are critical of me say, well, bro, where are the villains? You have no villains. You got to go after the villains. And maybe they're right. But my parents came to this country in the 1960s when John F. Kennedy was talking about a vision for America doing great things for civilization. America was humming. It had activity. And that's what inspired me to go into politics. I guess Kennedy's villain was the Soviet Union. And we should want to be preeminent in the world, to stay ahead of China. But we don't have to make each other as Americans villains.
I do want to talk about tech in Silicon Valley, though, because your district encompasses Silicon Valley with Elon Musk, of course, that's been very much center stage over the last several months. What is going on with Democrats and tech and the oligarchs, as Steve Bannon would call them? Like, what's that relationship? How does it need to change? Talk to me.
Elon Musk is an American tragedy. He could have been Bill Knudsen. Bill Knudsen was this GM executive who comes with FDR and leads the war production board. And we go from making 1,000 planes a year to 300,000 planes. And Musk could have come into government and worked with labor and worked with the industry and government to reindustrialize parts of America. Instead, he came into government and started firing veterans and started firing people in USAID, who, as Bill Gates pointed out, are helping poor kids in Africa. So I guess the broader point is, I think Silicon Valley, yes, we need to, as a party, be for entrepreneurship and innovation and bringing technology leaders in, but only if they're doing it in service of America, if they're working to build this country. And I think there were some people who had got the God complex in my district, who thought that they were the next things to building civilization, not realizing that, first of all, it was the government that helped build Silicon Valley through fundamental investments in the internet and in DARPA, but also that they have an obligation to participate in building the country.
But don't you think that there was this opening then, because Democrats kind of went harder on Silicon Valley, then the tech guys started to drift more towards the right? I guess to me it was fascinating to watch, because there doesn't seem to be any reason why Musk or Silicon Valley or something like crypto needs to be like left or right, but it seems like Democrats did cede some ground there. So how do you get it back? Do you bring Elon back into the fold? Is that something that's even like an interest to the party at this point?
No, but I think you bring a lot of technology leaders back into the fold by saying, look, we can't have a nation where you have $14 trillion in Silicon Valley, explosion of economic wealth with AI, and have other parts of the country left out. We need to build economic independence, economic security everywhere. And to do that, it's not just going to be government. We're going to need people in the private sector helping us to execute, to invest.
How do you sell Silicon Valley on that, though, when they feel like right now Democrats have kind of been antagonistic?
Well, a lot of people in Silicon Valley still support me, and I for taxing them more, and I'm for Medicare for all. But they know that I respect innovation and that I respect execution, and that what I want to do is take the best and brightest of technologists, but have them directed to creating economic wealth and jobs and opportunity across the country. Let me give you two specific examples. I'm working with OpenAI to set up AI academies in other parts of the country. China is going to have AI literacy for every Chinese individual by 2030. That's their goal. We need everyone in America to understand basic technology of AI, so that whether they want to be a plumber, a nurse, a machinist, that they can do that. And then I'm working with a number of these tech companies, including Google, to set up programs at public colleges, community colleges, and historically Black colleges, where they get a $5,000 scholarship, a $65,000 job after a 10-month course. So we can inspire technology leaders to be part of what I call an economic patriotism, economic development, and not demonize innovation and technology. But we need to expect that they're going to do something for the country, and not just expect it to be a take relationship.
Is there any upside to wooing Elon Musk back into the left?
You know, I saw recently his tweet about the Minnesota shooting, and I was so disappointed that he would politicize that. I don't recognize what happened to him, and I think that he has.
Because you knew him back in the day. You
He
guys had
blurred
a
my first
relationship.
book. I mean, he blurred my first book, and he was made in part by the Obama administration's funding of Tesla, and Ash Carter at Defense helped get him the contracts with SpaceX to take on Lockheed and to take on Boeing. I just think at this point, he's done so much damage. But the fact is that now he's speaking out against the tariffs and against the ban on international students, and he's speaking out about the deficits of the Republican budgets. My hope is just that he's not going to continue to enable an extreme agenda that hurts innovation, which is what the Trump administration has pursued.
Cryptocurrency. This is another topic where there's no reason for this to be a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. Are your fellow Democrats warming up to the idea of like crypto and Bitcoin? Where do you see that heading?
Well, Bitcoin is not going anywhere. I mean, it's just the modern form of gold. So we should have thoughtful regulation about it. But it is cheaper to transport than gold. I never understood why we had such an opposition to it. On stable coins, again, the value of transactions in stable coins is more than Visa and MasterCard. It's not going anywhere. Now, do we need to make sure that there is appropriate regulation so that it's backed one-to-one by the dollar, so that anyone offering a stable coin is audited, so that they have reserves? Absolutely. But we shouldn't say, okay, we're just opposed to a technology. And people say, well, what's the use case? A lot of times people have these transactions in stable coins because it settles quickly. But there is danger in the use of stable coins if it doesn't have one-to-one backing from the dollar. And that's where we need appropriate regulation.
What's your advice to the party to strike that balance of like sticking to your principles, but getting through to people that, might not immediately be on your bandwagon or on your team?
There are two things that orient my politics. At the deepest level, my grandfather, who spent years in jail alongside Gandhi on independence. And it's probably why I am so opposed to wars that don't make sense. And then the second thing is my upbringing in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where I grew up on a street, Amsterdam Avenue, where you had kids. My dad was an engineer. There were kids there who were the sons and daughters of plumbers, of HVAC technicians, electricians. We all went to the vice president of some company's house because that house had the pool. And I grew up playing Stratomatic and watching Rocky movies and going to Phillies games and Eagles games. And when I think about any policy, I think about, well, what would people on the street growing up in Pennsylvania think? And I have such a love for this country. I was one of the only Indian American kids of Hindu faith growing up in a 99% white community in Bucks County, Pennsylvania in the 80s. But I had so many people who believed in me, were kind to me, kind to my family. I think if you have a genuine love for the country and belief in the country, and you think about the people you grew up around, how they would take an idea, then you can have beliefs of what you think, but it doesn't come off as condescending or that somehow you know better. The final point is just a humility. There's no politician who has greater wisdom than the collective history of the American experience over 250 years. Now, that doesn't mean we just repeat history. You need new ideas. But I always think, okay, I'm just one footnote in a much longer story of America. And that, I think, is the kind of humility the Democratic Party needs. And when we say, oh, let's have flags and patriotism, that's not what it is. It's people can sense it. Do you believe in the wisdom and the decency of the American people? And I think if you have that, then you can be persuasive.
I think I'm hearing what might be in several years the beginnings of a campaign launch speech in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, but that's just me in my crystal ball. I don't know anything.
My team says we're tired of you going back to Bucks County and meeting your teachers. How many times are they going to write that story? But my teachers.
All right, Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Dasha.
Thanks so much, Congressman Ro Khanna, for joining the conversation. Now, you heard us talk there a little bit about how the Democratic Party is trying to find this new path forward. Well, there's a microcosm of that happening right now in New York City, where about a dozen Democrats are running to replace Mayor Eric Adams, who, by the way, is also running now as an independent. I wanted to call up my colleague Sally Goldenberg, who's been following the race. She also moderated one of the debates ahead of Tuesday's primary. Here's what Sally had to say. Sally, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
The New York mayoral election is on Tuesday. You've been covering this. You also moderated a debate between all of the candidates. There are so many questions I have for you, but I am curious, as someone who sat in that moderator chair and got to see this all up close and personal, what are the dynamics of the race that you picked up on that maybe others might not be as tuned into?
Yeah, the debate that we moderated was, very chaotic because we had 9 candidates and 4 moderators. It was the first one. It was everyone's kind of opening shot. And so I thought they were a little bit, kind of feeling out how to take their shots at Andrew Cuomo, the front runner. So it just seemed to me like being in the chair, like chaos. And we were trying to contain it.
That's kind of New York, right? That's on brand.
It was just a lot. And it's obviously not a race between 9 people. It's a race between 2 people with like a possible third. It seemed like almost like a dress rehearsal for the candidates because they were much more organized and pointed and sharp in their second debate than they were in ours.
I mean, this is a race that has been framed as having these major national implications. What do you think those are?
It's really a race between two people. Someone can creep up, especially with ranked choice voting. But right now, it's primarily a race between Andrew Cuomo, who represents the Democratic Party establishment. He comes from a Democratic family. His father was the governor. Everyone knows the name Cuomo. It's, universal name ID. He's moderate. He's an establishment politician. He's talking about restoring order. He's not really he's not young and exciting. And he's winning by virtually every poll shows he's winning. But creeping up is a Democratic socialist, 33 years old, state lawmaker, not a lot of experience, that's Zohran Mamdani, really connecting with voters on a message of income inequality. He articulates it in a way that people seem to be grabbing onto. And he was endorsed by AOC, he was endorsed by Bernie Sanders, he was endorsed by, left-wing organizations that are part of that movement. And so it really is the young, energetic, left-wing, left flank, whatever the right term is, movement versus establishment politics. And I think it's important to remember that voters tend to behave differently when they're choosing an executive. Zohran Mamdani is a legislator, AOC is a legislator, Bernie Sanders is a legislator, and people tend in New York and probably elsewhere in the country to think a little bit more small c conservative when they're picking an executive leader, especially at a time of chaos and uncertainty.
I mean, we're talking about former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo being the front runner in this race. I think if you had told me that, a couple of years ago, I would be really shocked. And I think a lot of people that haven't been paying attention to the race are probably surprised hearing that, because this is somebody that does have a lot of baggage. What does it say that he's the front runner? And if you could maybe remind some folks what that baggage is too.
Absolutely. So the reason he resigned in 2021 primarily was that the state attorney general, Letitia James, substantiated about a dozen allegations of sexual harassment against him among female staffers and others. But, staffers were driving it. And he, at the time, he did resign. He denies the charges completely. What I think he's benefiting from is a few things. One, the Me Too movement peaked and then kind of didn't anymore. It was a thing. It was in the mainstream, and I think it's just not in the mainstream anymore. I think he's done a good job of making the case for himself to voters that he didn't do anything untoward. He's Italian, he's older, he's just, puts his arm around people, so on and so forth. He's really, from a communication standpoint, minimized the stories that these women have brought forth.
There's also the nursing home scandal too during COVID-19. How much has that played a role?
So that's interesting because that's a live thing. So when he was the governor, he really came to fame doing his daily COVID briefings. But he also had a nursing home order or instruction that COVID positive patients be let back into nursing homes. And what's going on now is that Congress has criminally referred him to the Department of Justice under Trump, saying he lied to Congress in a briefing when he said he did not doctor or play any role in editing a report from his health department that was found to have undercounted nursing home deaths. And that is a live issue. The Department of Justice is reportedly investigating him. He has said as of, I think, a week or two ago that he never got a subpoena. But, he is, by all accounts, under federal investigation.
Is there a world in which that's kind of helpful to him, given this is now a Trump Justice Department? He can kind of play that tough guy anti-Trump role here?
And we kind of tried to get at that in the debate, and we tried from our seat as moderators to point out it's not just Trump. Democrats were also, upset with him and said he was lying. But we're in a hyper-partisan time right now in America. And the fact that Donald Trump, who is very unpopular in New York City, and this is a Democratic primary, so even more so. The fact that, it's his Justice Department, I think absolutely helps Andrew Cuomo. And he's, of course, used that, effectively. He's a politician. He's used it effectively. He put it in an ad the next day, essentially saying he's being victimized by, no pun intended, a trumped-up justice system. The fact is that there were Democrats who also raised concerns about his testimony and whether or not it was accurate. But facts get lost in politics and in elections.
Let's talk about Zohran Mamdani, who's a progressive in the race. He's seen as Cuomo's primary competitor. He got some of those big endorsements you mentioned, AOC. Bernie as well, right?
Mhm.
What does all of that represent right now? Like, how are you seeing his role both in this primary and in the bigger narrative around the Democratic Party?
I think it becomes very close. It says to people it says to the like sort of establishment left, the institutional left, that like these seats are within our grasp. And it's not just that we're going to win these one-off legislative seats in areas that have been gentrified by, young hipsters or whatever, that like we actually have a chance at these executive positions. Obviously, if you don't win, you don't win. And you don't get to like put your Democratic Socialist agenda to the test. But it does send a message that there's hope there for the movement. Most voters in New York City are selecting Andrew Cuomo. I don't think that's changing. I don't think 60-year-old people are picking Mamdani for the most part. I don't think church-going, Black women who really make up the heart of the Democratic Party are voting for Zohran Mamdani. No poll shows that. And so he needs to show not just that like his message works, but that there's like a functional way for the left to actually turn that energy into votes in an executive race.
Obviously, one of the issues that has really had the Democratic Party pretty fractured is Israel, Gaza. How is that playing into this race?
So New York has a very large Jewish population, and it's an active voting population. The issue is absolutely playing into the race. There's a couple of elements there. One is that I think donors and specifically, Andrew Cuomo's donors are motivated by that issue. Mike Bloomberg never liked Andrew Cuomo when they had overlapping tenures. He just endorsed him and gave $5 million to
Wow.
his super PAC, a massive amount of money. That's about 25% of the super PAC came from Mike Bloomberg. He is very motivated by a pro-Israel, but by his support for Israel. And other things as well. But that's a motivating factor for a lot of donors. And it is a motivating factor for a number of voters. There are a lot of people for whom support for Israel is central who aren't Democrats anymore, and we have a closed primary, or aren't like your prime Democratic voters. Democratic primary voters in New York City do tend to be a little, even if they're not voting ideologically, they tend to be a little more left of center. Mamdani's position on Israel, his criticism of Israel, is helping to fuel that. That influx of cash for Andrew Cuomo. When it comes to votes, I don't know.
Another candidate, Brad Lander, was arrested this week by immigration agents after escorting a defendant out of court. Dramatic images. We've seen them in other states as well. How do you think, or do you think that that's going to have an impact on the race at all?
I mean, Brad Lander's having a great closing. He had a good second debate performance. He got the endorsement of a panel of experts that the New York Times outsourced their editorial board to. He then got kind of an applause line in a New York Times editorial that was against Mamdani. And he owned the day yesterday. It's late, though. Early voting started on Saturday. He's in a distant third in the Marist poll. He's at, I think, 13% in the final round of a ranked choice voting. It's pretty late for him.
Speaking of Lander, folks that don't live in New York City might be confused by this because it does have a unique system, ranked choice voting, and that's led to this cross endorsement thing that's going on, including a cross endorsement from Mamdani and Lander.
You want to tell him?
You go first.
Nah, you go first.
Let's do it together. We're cross-endorsing.
Could you explain, the cross endorsement piece of it for people who haven't lived in a ranked choice city or area?
Yeah, what you're saying to voters is that, you should rank me first. But my friend Dasha here is saying a lot of things I agree with, you should rank her second. And you have to hope, if you're me, that I outlast you. And so it doesn't really matter that I've told my voters to rank you second, because you never get the benefit, because I am always above you in each round of voting. And that's the risk you take, because if you overtake me and I get disqualified, my voters who picked you second, you get the benefit of that. I think for Lander, it's easy to say Mamdani is his second choice vote, but I don't know how much benefit it will get him if Mamdani continues to outlast him. Do you know what I'm saying? Because Mamdani's not going to get disqualified first.
Sally, you've reported on politics for a long time. How has just watching this race, reporting on this race, sitting in that moderator chair, how does this race compare to some of the other, the dynamics in other races that you've covered?
So in the 21 mayor's race, it was so different. We were coming out of COVID. And there was just such a kind of desperation for the city to come back to normal. And ideology, there's always going to be an ideological candidate. In that case, it was Maya Wiley, and she came in third place. But the overwhelming majority of voters were either picking Eric Adams, the current mayor, who was like, I'm a police captain, I'll restore law and order. We don't have enough time to talk about him. And the second choice
That's a whole other rabbit hole.
A whole other rabbit hole, and law and order is a big part of it. But he had this like really strong message, and he had extreme message discipline. His team was very good about message discipline. So he was like, crime is high and disorder is high and relatively high, and I'm just going to be the steady hand. New York was, hit so hard during COVID, and the ramifications are still being felt financially and otherwise. And so when you add those two together, that's what most voters wanted. This is different. Voters are very split. You see the top issue in every poll is the cost of living, the cost of housing. That presumably plays well to Mamdani. He's certainly articulating a message about income inequality that plays well. But there's a prevailing sense of disorder. It's not like voters are saying disorder is my top concern. But everywhere you go, everyone you talk to, they're like, the mayor, chaos, Eric Adams, indictments. What the hell's going on in New York? We just need to get our city back. So even though the number one issue in almost every poll I see is affordability, there is this general kind of sense of frustration New Yorkers have that Eric Adams, they do not think he's been a good mayor. His approval ratings are terrible. And that predates his indictment.
And he's going to be in the race, actually. He is running as an independent now.
He's actually going to be in the race. He's running as an independent. Mm-hmm. He'll make things interesting. His numbers are terrible, but he's got a bully pulpit. He can be a good communicator when he wants to be, when he's not distracted with his own self-inflicted wounds. He'll make things very interesting.
Grab your popcorn. This is going to be fascinating. Sally, thank you so much for joining me today and giving your insights.
Okay, thank you for having me.
This has been The Conversation with Dasha Burns. We'll be back next week. If you want to catch future episodes of The Conversation, be sure to click the subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.